Welcome back, everybody, to Two Guys and a Stack of Comics. My name is Reed. Along with me, as always, is Mike. Mike, we
Hey
are going to do
everybody.
something really fun over the next 12 weeks, something we've thought a long time about. Well, we love talking all comics. Our favorite thing to do is break down the greats, the classics that have really worked. And so for the next 12 weeks on every Sunday, Mike and I are going to break down an issue of the absolute classic that is Watchmen by Alan Moore and Mr. Dave Gibbons. We're going to go issue by issue with this. So kind of go issue one, and then the next week will be issue two. Just talk about our overall thoughts on it. If you guys have a copy of Watchmen, if you want to watch and kind of give your thoughts down below on the issues as well, we're going to go through the entirety of it.
Yeah,
Just
read
kind of
along with us.
read along with us. Let us know what you think. I know we've seen at times. Mike and I have done issues of, on videos on Watchmen before. We'll post a couple of those below so you can get some of our overall thoughts on the story. But I know we've had some folks say they've read it and love it. I know we've seen some folks who think it's overrated. Some folks who've like, nah, I've never read it. And so, whatever thoughts across the spectrum that you have, would be really interested in seeing what you guys have to say.
If
But
you've never read it, this would be a good chance for you to kind of get an overview of the story and maybe break it down. It When did it come out? 85, 86?
Yeah, I believe we're talking with this. If I pull it up here, original publishing date on these 86, 87. So
86,
across
87.
across
And
12 issues. And if you haven't read it, great thing with Watchmen, because and not great because I think DC does it to keep the rights. But there are plenty of versions out there. So you can get something like this, the deluxe hardback one that's out there. That's got almost everything you need. But DC also has some of these smaller ones like this. Here's the library little edition. It's almost like manga size. It's like $9
the
as well, and
pocket.
you still get all the details. So if you've never picked up Watchmen before, I'm sure you can probably find it anywhere. But we just encourage folks. I think it's a story that at the very least is worth reading. You may not walk away loving it like Mike and I do, but I do think it is a story worth reading. And there's no question, it's probably the most influential graphic novel of all time, certainly for modern comics.
I'm just going to read the back of my version real quick.
Mhm.
One of Time Magazine's 100 best English language novels since 1923. And keep in mind, this was a monthly comic book.
Yep.
Over 2 million copies in print. Eisner Award winner, Hugo Award winner. Um, and it's just,
Well, as
amazing.
it says on the back of most of these things, it's the most celebrated kind of graphic novel. Even though Alan Moore hates the term graphic novel, it is the most celebrated graphic novel of all time. And so we'll kind of start our breakdown on this. We're going to run through the story and then just go through the points that really stood out to us, the highs and the lows of each one. I think what immediately strikes me before we kind of go into a direct breakdown of it, what really struck me about this first issue reading, and I haven't read this in probably 18 months, almost 2 years maybe. I think what was really impressive to me is throughout 20 some pages, I believe it's 26 pages of the first issue, how well the world is built instantly in this first issue. And that I think, especially contrasting it to in the last 2 years, we've gotten Ultimate Spider-Man 1, we've gotten Absolute Batman 1, Absolute Superman, Absolute Wonder Woman. We've gotten all these things that are offshoots into new worlds that are trying to do world building. And what's always interesting is the first issue is normally a rough issue with those things because I think they always tend to bite off more than they can chew. I think because they try to go for grand and epic. And what's so cool that I think Moore does in this, the world building, but it's just a small story that tells you so much about each character. Because largely the framing device of this is a murder of a man that as a reader you don't know. And
Yeah.
yet, what that leads to, and how well by the end of these 26 pages you seem to know Rorschach and Niteowl and Dr. Manhattan and Silk Spectre and even Hollis Mason, the original Niteowl, how well you feel ingrained into this world, the relationships and the characters. It's a master class in world building, in my opinion, just across the issue. How well you feel you know each character just in this first issue.
Yeah, I mean, and it opens up, you know, on this page, and you can see the way Dave drew it basically like in a basic 9 grid. He never varied too much for it throughout the issue. And then sometimes they'll have like, a, a panel that goes across horizontally like that to give, a better view. But he stuck to this grid format, and it works so well. I mean, and immediately, right off the bat, we see the blood on the sidewalk, and that last panel, that perspective of the detective looking down, and just the little details like his bald spot,
Yeah.
and they're just kind of nonchalantly talking about the murder and trying to figure out what happened. Um, the button there with the blood splatter on it, and the guy in this panel here hosing down, you know, and of course, if you're a Watchmen fan, you probably have seen the movie adaptation, which a lot of people hate, but I really thought it was pretty darn good. They got a lot of the scene building right from these panels, but just this first panel, and it's in Rorschach's voice.
Yeah, I
And
think it's interesting reading it again in the light of you and I recently did a video on watching the 2009 movie. How instantly, like if you read it now, you hear Jackie Earl Haley's voice as
yeah,
Rorschach when you read the dialogue. And I think even if you don't do that portion as a reader, the brilliant framing device of this murder, but instantly being dropped into Rorschach's journal, I think is one of the things you and I have talked a little bit about with bemoaned in comic books is somewhat the loss of like the internal dialogue of the character has been in comics. I think we still see some folks do that, but the usage of the journal to kick off, I think we kind of break down the characters that are in here. We'll start with the standout character for good or bad from the Watchmen series overall, and that's Rorschach, who is the framing device in this. And certainly we know Alan Moore's perspective. I think Rorschach blew up as a character more than he ever intended. But
yeah.
I will say, in terms of fascinating as far as characters, just what you get from his internal monologue, he is fascinating to read as a
And it's
character.
and it's almost like Alan Moore and his worldview and perspective is on grand display in the character of Rorschach, where he has this negative outlook on everything, and just sees the worst in the world, and you could
Yeah, it
just see
kind of
how,
dials it all up to 11. And while Rorschach shares of a lot of
yeah,
opinions that Moore certainly doesn't have, I think, like
right,
you said, you do see a lot of that
that
somewhat
pessimistic,
curmudgeon
yeah,
attitude that Moore seems to
yeah.
have at times, even when people are complimenting him
And he
on
wasn't even
things at
much
display.
in 1986. He wasn't even that curmudgeon yet. He
No,
was
I think
in to Mr. Moore from early childhood, maybe.
I think
Anyway,
what Watchmen this first issue does really well. I think a couple things, if we just highlight some pages and things that really stand out. Just the storytelling done in this silent thing here of Rorschach kind of starting his initial investigation and
mm,
going through and finding the button and using the grappling hook to go through. And then you kind of go with this again, worthy of like a splash page, but I love that Gibbons doesn't do it. That classic shot of Rorschach on the broken window. I think what's so cool with this is one of the things you and I don't like a ton of in modern comics is the amount of silent panels and the way there's a lack of storytelling at times when you read a book. What I love about this is even in the silent panels, there is so much happening that you can pick up on. Just like Rorschach's little investigation across the apartment as he's
right?
uncovering all this stuff that's new to you as a reader. He
And
shows a ton
finding the
about
little,
Rorschach's worldview, his approach to things. You get so much from the character over about 3 pages, just explaining so much of what you need to know. I think you're only 6 pages in by the time Rorschach discovers the comedian's costume in the closet and all that. And between the dialogue from the journal, the silent scenes, and the methodical approach he goes to, it's an amazing example of storytelling of how quickly you know almost everything need to know about Rorschach in like a handful of pages.
and you know what I didn't pick up on, and maybe I'm misinterpreting this. This is probably the third or fourth time I've read it, and I haven't read it in probably 5 years. So there was a little, and I forget, it was a little bit later in the issue where he mentions that uh, some guy got killed, and yeah, it turned out to be the comedian. Like he didn't know the
Hmm.
comedian's real name
Yeah.
until that moment. And that's why he was surprised when he went into the closet and found, I don't think I ever really picked up on that in all the years. Like he didn't know the comedian's civilian identity.
Yeah. No, and I think what's kind of cool when you read through, the story a little bit, the framing device of those detectives and how they talk about Rorschach in terms of like he's the psycho who's still out there.
I
And I
know.
think that's such a cool design of the story. I just think this first 10 pages of this story, the framing device, the journal, the silent scenes, the build up to all of it. You just understand so much about Rorschach, who he is in this world, what this world looks like, um, and
And
all
here's
that.
where they were
It's
passing him
brilliant.
on the street. And there he is holding up a sign in plain sight. That's
Hmm.
Rorschach right there. And there's the cops walking past him. Classic.
So we get the setup of, you've got the death of the comedian, you've got Rorschach's, initial kind of appearances there. I love that you instantly transition from, the active superhero that is kind of despised to you get the two old retired guys. You go to the two night owls, Hollis Mason, you got Dan sitting back, having a beer, discussing. Again, I think this is another example of how this world gets fleshed out. It's a conversation just between two men, but just from the subtle comments between these two guys about the past of heroes, how these guys got shut down, you see the humility of Hollis Mason and the thing. You see Dan. It's again, it's one of my favorite parts of this story is when you transition to these two men talking. Just the juxtaposition of where Rorschach is he's the same guy out there fighting, and then you go to these two other crime fighters who are just completely out of the game.
They're
I think that it's a
retired.
great framing device.
Yeah, and they're just talking about the old days. And it's really relatable to me because I always had a lot of older friends and mentors, guys that were older. And I used to love to just listen to them talk about the old days.
Hmm.
Tell me about what the old days were like. And so it's really relatable because I had a very good friend many years ago. He's passed on now, but I would just go and hang out with him, and he would tell me about the old days of what comic books were like in the 60s and the underground comic book industry. And that scene between um,
The two
you
night
know
owls, yeah.
the two night owls just really brought that personally home to me. I was like, yeah, I could relate to sitting down with the old guy and just listening to him tell his stories. And it just brings the reader into this intimate moment, but yet it furthers the plot along. And like you said, for 26 pages or whatever,
How
you
much
get,
we get from start to finish.
I know it's amazing.
Well, then Moore does the great transitionary thing there to Night Owl. Dan gets home, and there you got eating beans in the kitchen. It
Yeah.
is Rorschach, and you get over the next handful of pages, you get the great dialogue between these two men. And again, I think we're more. I think you can critique more for a lot of things in terms of I think some of the cynicism, some of the darkness that he brought to comic books and its effect in the modern age. But one thing I think when you read Watchmen that's incredible is the dialogue between those two men and how quickly you understand without having to see flashbacks and all the stuff that they don't doesn't have to be some 2 page flashback of them two fighting together or anything like that. How much you get in just a relatively short amount of thing of what these men's relationship used to be, that they used to work together, how disparate their circumstances have become now, and just how you can tell how uncomfortable both of them are, where you can see Rorschach pities Dan, and Dan has a ton of shame about him no longer being Night Owl, and kind of almost resenting that Rorschach's there because he's this reminder of something he hates too. Captured so brilliantly over over just a small amount of time.
And
Again, it's just a master class in writing characters in terms of introductions, how quickly you recognize these characters.
and I'm gonna get this one thing, this one tiny little panel that kind of sums it up. How Rorschach is really playing Dan and stringing him along because he knows he's going to need his help. But Rorschach would never really ask for help, would he? But
Mhm.
this little middle panel, he's like, "Yeah, those were some great times, right, Rorschach?" And he's like, "Whatever happened to us?" He's like, "You quit,"
Yeah.
and walks away and kind of leaves him with that guilt complex that he knows he's already given him. But the brilliance of this scene to me is the fact, like you said, so little dialogue, but what's there, you can tell the relationship that they used to have, how disparate they are, and kind of, but the mutual respect was there, and I don't know, you could just tell the two
It's
personalities.
4 pages total from when they meet to when you get this haunting shot of Dan filled with regret in front of the
Yes,
costume as this, you can tell, sort of ruffled, ill-fitting suit for a guy who's, he's out of his prime. He misses the glory days. To have 4 pages give you so much of how much these men's relationship, who they are to each other. Again, it's one of the finest examples of writing, certainly in a comic book,
yeah,
but almost period. In that, like, if you actually, count the words and just how quick this appearance is, how much you get
he's
for any sort of written storytelling. It's amazing how fast you kind of understand it and how well, I think, like you mentioned, how well you can relate to one side of that character or the other. And I think that's
yeah,
the interesting thing is, when I was younger, I was related more to not Rorschach's personality, but you think you'd be the guy who's still out there fighting like Rorschach. And
yeah,
as a reader, when you're a little bit older, you realize, no, I'd probably be the Dan character who's
yeah, I probably would
remorseful and sitting
be.
back. And it's again, it's just such a great framing device for it to start with the scene of Rorschach, the scene of Dan, and then pivot to this very quick interaction between the two, where you understand so much about the world, so much about the characters, and the regrets and relationships that both of them have with each other. It's fantastic. It's just incredible that you're only 12 pages into the story at that point, how much you know.
And we'll probably point this out in several more instances. But one of the other linchpins of the storytelling element of this is the art by Dave Gibbons. I mean, and the colorist. I forgot who the colorist was, but this is 1980s, you
Higgins,
guys.
John Higgins with the coloring, yeah.
Yeah, this is 1980s. This is old school comic book coloring before everything went digital, and old school regular pen and ink on paper artwork. And it's just so well done. It's just, and the expressions on some of these characters, when Rorschach goes to the bar to try and
Yeah,
muscle
no,
some
that next scene where
information.
Rorschach goes in and starts interrogating people
Yeah,
looking for who killed the comedian
I
to
mean,
get information.
the art
Again,
and the
2 pages, but
colorists.
so effective to let you know how far Rorschach's willing to go. Again, great stuff. We end the issue with two other interactions, and largely this is Rorschach, the remainder of the issue. He goes to Dan to warn him that we understand, after the comedian's death and Rorschach understanding who the comedian is, instantly goes to the fact that, hey, there might be people targeting former superheroes. And
So
so we
he
get his first interaction with Ozymandias,
Wait, before
and
that, on his way to Ozymandias, he does have to break a few
break a
fingers.
few bones, yeah, mess some people up.
Yeah. Okay, go
And
ahead.
then again, we get our interaction with Ozymandias. And
Yeah.
again, for a framing device of understanding this world, Ozymandias being the complete opposite of Dan. You have a guy not regretful at all, seemingly, about leaving, and that he's like one of the few based on, he's telling Rorschach, hey, man, I quit before we were taken down.
I know. And
Smartest man in the world, according, he's got this huge empire that
here's
he's built.
this panel of Oz, like it is in the Dave Gibbons captures his little smug, you know, look on his face
Yeah,
right there. And anyway, go ahead.
it's a
But
great interaction. Again, I mean, you kind of leave. I love, again. I think what Dave Gibbons does such a good job when he uses not the full page thing, but these shots that he gets that are just so descriptive and silent but haunting. Of like, you contrast that with Dan haunted by the little night owl costume. Then you pitch that to Adrian staring out the window with the little Ozymandias toys
with
and
the
everything
action
behind him.
I know.
It's just incredible how much you can pick up from these characters. Like you said, there's a smugness that you instantly pick up with Ozymandias. Just and again in the space of 2 pages, really that's there. And that's again, it's such great character building that you instantly understand. Rorschach doesn't like this guy, he doesn't respect this guy, sees him as a sellout. And Adrian looks at Rorschach as like you're this obsessed weirdo, and it's done in I think what 10 panels total that we get out of this, or what, about 11 panels. Um, you then juxtaposition that to Rorschach again going through the journal, talking about, and then you get the absolutely fantastic kind of appearance of Dr. Manhattan again, just how great Gibbons' use of scale and everything is that you understand how powerful he is. And again, not a full 2 page spread, not some huge thing, just half the page of a standard panel to just demonstrate the disparity between Dr. Manhattan and Rorschach.
And
Uh,
and the coloring, like from Ozymandias, where you see this blues, and then he's outside the military research facility,
mhm.
and it's kind of more earth tones and warmer tones, and then when he goes in to see Dr. Manhattan, it's back to all blues again. I
Yeah,
mean, this is just textbook. I mean, classic.
you can really see how much of this issue is planned out in almost every detail, from the lettering of when Rorschach's talking, the lettering of when Dr. Manhattan's talking, the coloring that's used. You get a very, I thought, was such a cool use of Dr. Manhattan's powers where Rorschach's like, I'm not leaving, and Manhattan just removes him while he's mid-sentence. I think,
It's
again,
so
showing
great.
the disparity of this world in terms of the power that Manhattan has compared to Rorschach.
I'm not leaving. Boom. Until I had my say, and he's outside in the yard on the other side of
Just
the fence
instantly staring
again.
at nothing. Yeah, it's just you also get your introduction to Silk Spectre. You see how miserable she is in her life in just a couple pages, and then
Oh, and
she
then
re
a few sentences, and you instantly get the
you,
relationship between her and her mom.
yeah, no, you get that, and then you have where she goes out to dinner with Dan, and you get them talking about the older times, and you kind of wrap from there. And then, of course, if you get the extra material, you get the written portion with Hollis Mason, his autobiography in the book, which again, really cool when you read that because of how much Rorschach's referencing, hey, there were really nasty things said about Blake by Hollis Mason in his book. Um, I
I
think,
love I love the way Alan Moore did that. Like you
mhm,
had your classic comic book storytelling, and then how much thought he probably put into this. And then at the end, you get like 4 pages of prose with some additional great artwork by Dave Gibbons with these old, recreated old photographs
yep,
of the old days, which really, like, as if those 26 pages weren't enough to get you involved and
this just
interested in
fleshes
this.
out the world even further.
I mean, I love it. That's great.
No, I think when I read Watchmen, and again, me and you are going to go one issue at a time on this a week, but I think with reading the first issue, I think what's so impressive to me is how much you understand about all of these characters that are going to be our main players the remaining way of the way. How much you understand about the world, the dynamics, the relationships, and none of it was like cheating. I think that's the other part is sometimes in comics they will have to do, and it's cool when they do it, but they'll do those flashback pages, like the 2 page panels with all the little bubbles showing the classic scenes. And it's a cool thing. He doesn't have to do that because he's so great at writing the dialogue, the interactions, and how much you kind of find yourself relating to one of the characters more than others in terms of so much about Rorschach, so much about Dan, so much about Manhattan, Silk Spectre, everybody from just this brief snippet of what we get in the 12 issue story. It's just amazing to me how one issue in this, I think there's more storytelling in the 26 pages here than we see in the average 6 issue story arc right now.
Oh
And
yeah,
that
and in the
you're starting from
centerpiece,
scratch and you get so much.
you get Osmandius in the middle of it all with his little smug expression and I forgot. Let me look up what he says. It's so poignant. Hold on. Let me go back. The end of their interaction.
Hmm.
Rorschach, I know we were never friends, but even so, you're being unfair. Nobody retired me. I chose to quit.
Yeah.
I chose to quit adventuring and go public 2 years before the Keene Act, and then Rorschach's like, good timing, you know. And then he
Yeah.
says, I came here to warn you about the mass killer, so you wouldn't end up the smartest man in the morgue. But I guess there's worse things to end up as. Be seeing you.
Yeah.
This is
No, it's how well he writes the antagonistic relationships of him and Ozymandias, and I think that's the interesting thing is Rorschach is such a framing. Obviously, he is the framing device if we're seeing everybody through his eyes.
yeah,
Um, but it's just such it's I've always thought in this thing with Watchmen, like there's times I wonder, like, is it overrated? Right? Even though I love it. Like
I
I'll
know.
go back and go like, is it overrated? Because it gets so much praise heaped upon it. There's so many people who instantly put it as number one. And then you go back and you read it and you're like, that was 26 pages and I know
Yeah,
so much. And you feel so invested early on.
yeah,
And I think the other thing is the stakes are relatively small. I think that's to kind of close out here. I think that's the impressive part of this is largely just a murder happened. We see
murder
snippets
mystery.
of the murder, and
Yeah,
then we see a character go and visit four people, and that's
yeah,
the issue. And
yeah,
yet from that, you get the framing device of this world. You get the interactions who everybody is. You get an instant snapshot of the mindset where all of these people are and where they'll be driven over the next 11 issues. It is a fantastic use of storytelling. And that brings us to the end of chapter one of Watchmen. We will be back next week to go through the second issue or chapter of Watchmen. What did you guys think about the first issue down below? If it's been a while since you read Watchmen, let us know what you think, folks. We'll go through the entire story for you. We look forward to the journey with you as we go through one of the greatest graphic novels of all time. As always, folks, thank you so much for watching. God bless you. We'll catch you in our next video.
thanks everybody.